Settle down. You're doing too much. Try harder. It's the only way to succeed. Who's right? I was accepted into a private middle school in the suburbs of Chicago. I showed up in Walmart clothes to a Bloomingdale's 6th grade homeroom. I was miserable, and I wanted to be there even less than my 29, they've been best friends since birth classmates wanted me to be there. But my parents had made it clear. This is opportunity. This is the best chance you get to move ahead. Unable to disappear in my too small down jacket and corduroy pants, I decided to stand out. I pushed my way into 10th grade French class, started several very exclusive after-school clubs, one member only, fought against anti-Semitism in the social studies curriculum, played on every team. Okay, that was required, and I was dreadful, and made not one friend in 3 years. So many well-meaning teachers pulled me aside to tell me to just relax a little. Don't stress. That was a high-touch phrase in the 1980s, and I heard it a lot. Not at home, though. My parents, first-generation Americans born to parents who were refugees, had built their lives by trying harder and doing more. Born way before Jews could pass as white, they believed that anything was possible, but if it was worthwhile, it would take a lot of work. 11 years later, armed with my Bachelor's of Fine Arts and very little common sense, I'd taken a job I had no business being offered. That's how I found myself backstage at the Second City Improv Theater in Chicago, working and laughing and learning alongside some of the funniest, would someday be famous, smartest people I'd ever met. And damn, that was stressful. I'd been hired on a whim by the executive vice president. He told me later that I was the first person hired from outside ever. I was 10 years younger than anyone else in the company, and I was on a learning curve for much longer than I should have been. I did eventually crack the code and integrate, only to discover that the substance use culture was way past my comfort zone. So I decided to apply to medical school, like you do. I moved 500 miles, enrolled in science classes and an MCAT prep course, built a loft in half a sublet room, and juggled 3 part-time jobs. I also volunteered as an emergency medical technician, where I mentioned the stress that I was facing to a paramedic who seemed to really love his job and his life. "Tell me about it like chest pain," he said. "On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is it?" A 7, probably. 3 years later, in debt up to my ears, I stood in an operating room at 3 o'clock in the morning, holding a retractor above my head to keep a woman's uterus in view for 4 hours. And I reflected on my choices. I was sharing a house with 9 other people, but only 4 if the city is asking, working as an American Sign Language interpreter to support my eating everyday habit, studying, even in the bathroom, and going on hospital cafeteria dates with a cute nursing assistant I met. So stressful, like a 9 out of 10, but worth it. And confusing. Because one of the things I was studying so hard was the negative effect of stress on people's bodies and minds. Stress, I was learning, was the new cigarette, a bad habit one should never take up. We were told to counsel patients on the dangers of stress, and that, should our patients not listen, they were pretty much doomed. Does this sound like a problem you've faced? We've been taught to fear stress, to avoid it, to minimize it, to eliminate it. If you're causing stress in someone's life, you're the villain. If someone is causing stress in your life, that relationship is toxic, get out. That we have to get away from stress before it kills us. That if you're stressed, you can't possibly be happy. Again, I couldn't reconcile these 2 narratives. You have to experience stress to get what you want, or stress is poison, stay away from it at all costs. So I searched for people I could learn from. Which path is best? And what I found confused me even more. How much stress people faced wasn't the differentiator. The difference seemed to be how they perceived it and how they handled it. I'd like to say I learned the lesson then, but nope. 10 years later, working at a federally qualified health center as an attending physician in family medicine, I saw a patient I'd known for years, a middle-aged, college-educated, middle-class white woman with progressive multiple sclerosis. Her disease had worsened to the point that she relied on a motorized wheelchair, using a toggle at her chin to move around. "Hi, how are you today?" "Wonderful," she told me. "My grandbaby turned 1 this weekend. He's getting to be such a big boy, and the flowers at my door are blooming, and I'm going to that Friday night concert series in the park this weekend. I'm really excited." I think I still wouldn't have learned the important lesson headed my way, except it was only a little bit later that same morning that I saw another middle-aged, college-educated, middle-class white woman in the room next door. This woman was well. No mental health issues, no physical issues, except for some mild, occasional low back pain. "Hi, how are you today?" "Terrible. It's everything. It's my back. Nobody understands. My work doesn't accommodate me. My family just plans things, never thinking about whether or not I can join." "Have you been having pain?" "Well, no, but I could be." When I asked, she rated her stress 10 out of 10, and I went on to help her as best I might. But I also kept thinking, how could I help more patients be like the woman behind door number 1? You see, I'd been a doctor at this point for more than a decade, and I was trying to reconcile several things I'd noticed. First, people are afraid of anything stressful. Sure, it will harm them, and do everything they can to avoid it. Second, resilience, the ability to navigate change and come through it whole and with a sense of purpose, was a much better predictor of people's happiness than health or wealth or anything else I could find. And third, the people who were resilient had faced a great deal of stress in their lives. Because stress is to mental health and resilience what exercise is to our body's fitness. For most of us, both stress and exercise are kind of awful, easier to avoid than engage in, and harmful to overdo either one. But it's the only way to get stronger. My med school professors were right. Stress can be damaging. We have to avoid or minimize the damage by knowing our limits, recognizing the warning signs in our own minds and bodies, not just the red flags like substance abuse, risky behaviors, or sabotaging relationships, but the yellow flags as well, the behaviors or feelings that tell us we need to go ask for help now before we get hurt. And my med school professors were wrong. Stress is a tool, not a toxin. Just like every tool, it can bash your head in if you don't know how to use it, but you cannot build without it. I'd like to say that I learned this lesson from other people's experience, but stresses and people don't really work that way. 4 years later, I was building my own business as a youth development speaker, still practicing medicine, raising my 4 boys with their dad, that cute nursing assistant I'd married who is now an emergency medicine doctor. The Second City Improv Theater invited me back to create a show about raising kids. I'd hosted a PBS television series and was guesting on the Today Show and Good Morning America. And then my mom slipped into a coma and went into hospice 500 miles away. The stress I faced writing my mom's eulogy felt like a solid 5. I asked my uncle, a psychologist with many books and decades behind him, what he thought about the fact that it didn't bother me more. "I'd be surprised if it really even stresses you that much," he answered. "You spent your childhood caring for your mom as she struggled with bipolar disorder and alcoholism, and your adulthood helping her manage all of her physical issues. You have the skills for this." Skills. The paramedic who scooped up overdose patients and performed CPR but smiled every day and found time to mentor me. The nurses and patients I met in med school whose outlook defied their situations. The patient with MS who looked straight at and also beyond her circumstances. My parents sending their only child out to face each new challenge. No platitudes, but plenty of humor and faith in me. Skills. That's what they all had. Those 6 weeks, going back and forth from whirlwind times at home with my kids to long stretches of silence at my mom's bedside as she slipped away were actually the calm before another storm. My marriage was ending. You might think, as lots of people felt brave enough to actually say out loud to me, well, what did you expect? You're doing too much. That's when I realized I had to do more. I had to learn not only that there are skills to resilience, but what exactly they were, because I was going to need them in spades. If I was going to get through the hardest time in my life and help my boys through it as well, I needed to understand what specific skills create resilience. I'm a scientist, so I looked at the research. When you look at dozens of markers measured by scientifically validated resilience scales, the ones social scientists use to define resilience, there are 8 key skills. 8 actions anyone can take at any time, any one of which could make me more resilient and able to handle this enormous change I was facing. Number 1, build connections with other people. People I'm willing to ask for support. I don't have to have all the answers, but when I don't have them, it's the people I know or can reach that will make all the difference. I could work on broadening the number of people I really know, not just the folks on my social media friends lists, but genuine connections. And I could deepen some of the connections that I do have by showing up for them, yes, but also through being vulnerable, which can be really hard. But when I got brave enough to tell a few people the truth about my grief and anger, they were able to understand what I needed in the midst of my divorce. It turns out that the most meaningful connections I have didn't happen until I was willing to stop believing my own advertising of always being in control and having it together. Number 2, set boundaries. What am I willing and not willing to do? My own resilience gets stronger when I put some limits around my availability and my resources. Recently, I made a new rule at home. No one may talk to me when I'm in the bathroom, unless there's actual fire or spurting blood. That one boundary has strengthened my resilience remarkably. Number 3, open to change, to the possibility that there are different paths than just the one I'd imagined. Staying open-minded is a hard one for me because of my pretty profound ego. It makes me very resistant to the idea that I could be wrong about anything, but especially the future I'd pictured, which makes it very hard to be resilient when I'm wrong. Number 4, manage discomfort. I had to figure out what helps me start to feel okay when I don't feel okay. This is absolutely crucial to resilience. Most of us hate discomfort to such a degree that we can't think past it. We overeat or focus on how many drinks will numb that discomfort. Those and so many other negative coping mechanisms cause real damage. All changes, even the good ones, are uncomfortable. I finally found the right combo of exercise, trashy romance novels, and ice cream to manage my feelings without hurting myself or anyone else. Number 5, set goals. I have to know what I want to have any hope of getting it. That's it. That's the tweet. Number 6, find options. You know which choice most of us go with when we're faced with a decision? The first one we think of. And we have a lot of lore around this. Trust your gut. Go with your instincts. But I know that often my first idea is not my best one. Case in point, this talk needed several pretty significant edits. Most rough draft ideas are not as good as they could be with a little bit more thought. So I have to force myself to think of several options in just about every situation. Number 7, take action. Resilience means getting through the change. So I have to do something. The stress hormone that gets released when we encounter change is cortisol. Most people have heard of that as the fight or flight hormone, and it can cause either of those reactions. The most common reaction to cortisol, though, is actually freeze. We get so overwhelmed by change that we get stuck. When I knew that Second City Improv wasn't the right place for me, I faced such a wide open unknown. Did I want to change theaters? Try to get work in television? Wait tables? become a firefighter or a teacher or run for office or make the obvious move and be a doctor. It was too easy to just keep listing possibilities instead of picking one and moving forward. Knowing how to act on my goals, to choose one or more of the options I identified, keeps me out of option overload. And number 8, persevere. This last one, the ability to try again when what I tried didn't work, that's the one that takes the most practice. I think that's why it's the skill that most people credit when they finally achieve success. The goal of handling everything I was facing felt impossible. But these were actions I could take any time to strengthen my resilience so that I could keep doing too much without hurting myself or others. Because we believe that stress is the most dangerous villain, we fear taking on too much. We blame ourselves, or accept blame, when our circumstances hand us more than a full plate. I have never been busier in my life than I am as a single mom raising 4 kids, doctoring, and building my own business. I've also never been happier or healthier. Adults are torn between doing too much and taking care of ourselves. And what I finally learned is that these are not opposing concepts. Handling everything that comes at you while building the life you want doesn't have to be dangerous or impossible. We all have some resilient skills and we can develop more. So don't waste your time fearing stress. Don't worry about doing too much. You're the expert on you. Only you know what you can handle. It's your obligation to notice when it's harming you, and it's your right to decide when it's helping you. Say no when you can, or minimize or share with someone else the stressors that cause you damage. And take on every busy thing that serves your purpose. Do exactly what you need to do to be whole. That's not too much for you. Thank you.